So tonight we have Darlene Southworth. She's a retired professor of biology from Southern Oregon University, where we are coming to you live. She began studying plants in high school and has a BS and MS degree from in botany from the University of Michigan and a PhD in botany from University of California, Berkeley. She has been thinking about plant names because she participated in the Adopt a Rare Plant program this past summer, searching for Sidalcea, Hickman petraea, or the Collomia Mazama, Mazama, Collomia, and the Iliamna latibracteata, or broad-bracted globemallow. So without further ado, I'm just going to switch over the presentation and we are going to get started.
The second kind of botanist carries an umbrella and is an umbrella and delivery. The other type of botanist who worries about the names of plants is called a systematic botanist or a systematist. I'm none of those things. I'm a botanist, but I studied the development of pollen. And I came to this through Dave Garcia because when he started this Adopt a Rare Plant program, I thought that'd be pretty cool. So I signed up, and then he sent me this list of 30 plants. And I knew them, but I hadn't thought about them for some 25 years, say. I hadn't thought about those plants. So I was really focused on their names. And I found out that if you misspell some names, if you misspell a word and you go into Google, it will fix it for you. If you misspell a word and you go into Oregon Flora, it will pretend you don't exist. It's basically safe. So you have to get it really right for some kinds of sources. So that made me think about words. I have not named a plant. Frank has, and more about that later. I have not been a person who discovered an unknown plant and named it. I have been a person who discovered unknown fungi and named them. And the rules, about which more later, for describing them are the same for fungi and plants, however different they are. Yeah, so the rules are the rules. Okay, let's try this again. Is this any better?
Yeah, just say that.
Okay, I will stay here. Is it okay now? Anyway, this is the Sidalcea, Sidalcea hickmanii, variety petraea. These things just trip off my tongue, no worries. And that's the inspiration by Dave Garcia. Okay, it's better. The inspiration due to T.S. Eliot, of course, is the naming of plants is a difficult matter. And I'll just read you from his poem. You know what I'm talking about? No. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think that I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat or a plant must have two different names. He says three, but I say two. First of all, there's the name that the family used daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo, or James, such as Victor, or Jonathan, George, or Bill Bailey, all of them sensible, everyday names. There are fancier names. If you think they sound sweeter, some for the gentlemen, some for the dames, such as Plato, Admetus, Electra, Demeter, but all of them sensible, everyday names. We'll stop there. You can go see the movie, the endlessly running Broadway show of cats. So this is plants, however, and those things will recur. Okay, I'm going to go through both common names and scientific names, and after common names, I'll take questions about that, and then we'll go on to scientific names. Okay, let's see. All right, why do we need names? Why do we name anything at all? The topic of naming of plants is as big as the English language, so this could take a long time to discuss, maybe all the rest of your life. I don't tend to take that much time. But here are the obvious things that people had to know. What you need to know is that common names came first. Scientific names are derivative from them. We'll come to that. So obviously, if with the beginning of language, and I'm not that old, so, however it was as it started, whenever it was that it started, we have no record of it. We have no record of what the sound sounded like. We have some that come down to us. They had to talk about food. They had to say where it was and what to eat. They had to say what not to eat, what was poison. They had to say how to make a shelter, how to make fencing, how to burn something, what was the better fuel. They had to talk about plants just as early as they had to talk about animals. So these are the things, the thing that I forgot to put on here is medicines. They had to talk about how to fix injuries. Clearly, common names go way back. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, here are some common names that I managed to find before written language and before we have a record of these actual languages. The hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics use the picture of a lotus and the picture of papyrus. There are some others that they use as well. The runes from Scandinavia for birch and yew. You may know that yew is a perfectly good wood for bows. And birch, we know about that. And then the petroglyphs of the American Southwest, where they do a pretty good representation of corn. We call it maize. We call it Zea maize. We spell the maize differently, but it's still maize, isn't it? Okay. So this is a way of saying common names are really ancient. They go way, way back. They do require a common language, and we'll focus on English because it's really the only thing I speak. They're not translated directly. So what one language calls an oak tree, a different language might call a big tree, might call something else. And I have no knowledge of all of the languages of the world. You're not supposed to know that. Even in English, this word oak is very ancient. It goes way back to Old English and Proto-Germanic. This is an old one, but even oak, even in English, even the Oregon white oak, or Quercus garryana, is called one thing in Canada, which is just north, and one thing in the rest of the U.S., which is basically it's a western thing, so we don't call it the easterners call it. The Canadians call it Gary oak for a botanist named Gary, and we call it Oregon oak or Oregon white oak because we're Oregonians and we call them Oregon. Californians do the same thing. I don't actually know what Californians call Oregon oak. I think they can drop back to Garryana. They wouldn't dignify it by calling it Oregon. It's really interesting. See, common names are shifty. Now you're getting the idea that yes, they're common in the sense that we understand what the words mean, but they're not fixed and they're very slippery. The Germans call them Eichenbaum. That's clearly oak, Eichen. That's the sound is there. Acorn tree, yes, right. And so acorn, Eichen, oak, even slipping into the Italian quercus, it's really all the same. These are languages that are totally related to each other. I don't know how to pronounce the French, but they use chine. Anybody speak French here? Okay, I can get away with it. So it's not chin. It's not a dog. It's chine. Chin. What do you think? That's not in the oak group. That doesn't sound like acorn, quercia. And the Italians call it quercia. The Spanish, which is surely similar and derived from Latin, calls it encina, encino, robles, paso robles, the pass of the oaks. I think encina means more of a shrub oak, and robles means a bigger oak. Which one is chaparral? Encino or chaparral, it's shrub oaks, yeah. And robles, the bigger trees. So they have two words for oaks, where we have only one. Okay, so even there, we get a difference in common language. But all of them, sensible everyday names, common language, common names. Now, some of the common names are descriptive. And when they're descriptive, they're really helpful. They're really useful. Red something, hairy something, narrow-leaved something. You're always glad for it. And the red maples at this moment, a block from my house, are on fire with red. But all the rest of the year, they're green. So, go figure. They're sometimes related to use. A lot of the common names that have berry in them are edible. A fair number of them are poison, but that's it. If they're called wild radish, you might want to try it. If they're called poison something, poison ivy, poison oak, probably not. Then there's some really antiquated common names, which are clearly not scientific. They're not Latinized. Lousewort. Okay, that's a common name. I mean, we know the word louse. We don't know much about wort, but that means plant. So that's kind of Old English. Lousewort. That's really, so it's a common name. It's not terribly helpful. Wake robin for trillium. Okay, wake, yeah, I get it. Robin, I get it, but wake robin doesn't tell me anything about the plant. And bachelor's button. Anybody seen a bachelor wearing one of those blue flowers? And then there's these perfectly useless ones, which are clearly not ancient, like Henderson's Farkelia. The genus is Farkelia, and its species is Hendersonii. So you could either call it Henderson's Farkelia or Farkelia Hendersonii. That is a common name. As a common name, it's not terribly useful, but it's a nice plant. Okay, here's a couple examples of common names. The one on the left is called candy stick or sugar stick. So right away, this plant has two different names. When you see it and you see those stripes, maybe it looks like a peppermint stick, but they don't call it peppermint stick. They call it candy stick. Okay. The one on the right is an example of one of the Pacific Northwest native people's names, Salal, also called shawan. Those are native words for that plant. And the scientific name is Gaultheria shawan. So we actually are using an indigenous term for the species. These are not European plants. They're not Linnean, they're Pacific Northwest. And these also, so the familiar camas on the left, the common names are camas and quamash, and those are indigenous names. And the scientific name, Camassia quamash, well, that's pretty clear where that comes from. So it's all one. But to call it camas is to use a name that indigenous people gave it. It's not a single tribe. It was very widespread across the West. Yeah. The death camas, I mean, I sort of like names that have deadly and death in them. Why is this? Because when I had a friend who's looking at this solanum with these little red berries. Look at berries. He said, you should collect those and eat them. I said, well, I think that's deadly nightshade. And he said, well, no, it's not. I said, it's deadly nightshade. Don't eat it. So it has a lot of force if you say it's death camas. You probably not eat it. The scientific name used to be called Zygodinus. I don't know what that means. Toxicospordion. So there's toxico in there. So they're both the common name and the scientific name caution you. This is good then. Okay, and then another example on the left, the California lady slipper. Well, I don't actually wear shoes like that, and I don't actually know anybody who does. So, okay, we call those lady slippers, and they have a slightly moccasiny shoe-like structure. I don't know what else you bedroom slippers. Okay, let's call them bedroom slippers instead of lady slippers. Let's change that one. And on the right, the shooting star. Okay, that's quasi shooting star structure. Whether you would walk down the woods and say, oh, that looks like a shooting star, probably not. But given that that's the common name, it does seem logical. Okay, and here's an example of on the left of multiple names. So the Darlene grows in Oregon, grows in California. California pitcher plant, or just plain pitcher plant. A pitcher plant is one word, or cobra lily. I'm partial to cobra lily myself, but so there's no one common name for many plants. They have two. You can sort of use one or the other. And sometimes, as with the Waiithia on the right, mule's ears. When I see that, I know it's not Balsam oryza. It's not balsamute. It's the mule's ears one. Okay, and I don't even know any rules personally, but this seems logical to me with that, and that works. So common names, take them or leave them, use them or don't use them. Here's a couple more. The California Stormii has the three common names there. Told me pussy ears, told me cat ears, told me Mariposa lily. And here we meet one that's beginning to say, maybe we shouldn't use that word. You know, so common names follow the cultural aspects of the language. That is, when words become things you shouldn't say, and I'm not going to say any of them here, that's the only one. And then the language changes. And you may know that a lot of the common names of birds have been changed, especially by slave owners and people who said bad things about slaves, people who said bad things about indigenous people. But it's tricky. It's just drives me crazy. Like they're still letting Washington and Jefferson stand. So go figure. I do not know why that is. In plants, much less so, not zero, but less so. And this is one of them, the digger pine. Digger was said to be derogatory of native peoples. And that name has really gone from the books. Anything today won't say digger pine, but we couldn't say little common names. So in Oregon, it's called gray pine. What do you call it, right? Gray pine? So, yeah. Ghost pine. Ghost pine. Okay, Frank calls it ghost pine. Oh, yeah. Mark Turner's book calls it gray pine, and the Californians call it foothill pine. So all of those are okay. They're everyday names. We know this tree. I would have called it branch pine, but that isn't helpful. Okay, so common names change. There's no official way. There's no rules. There's just the evolution of language. And you know, that's the way things work. So that's how it is. So I'm going to switch to scientific names. Are there any questions, comments, or suggestions about common names that you'd like to raise now? Anything coming in the chat? Okay.
Just as a comment, I love, as somebody who struggles with the names and taxonomy and all that stuff as well. I always like to remember they know who they are.
Which has absolutely nothing to do with you or their names.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, these are all human constructs. Yeah. And I mean, all of the names are human constructs, so get over it. It's there it is, yes. Yes, I'll give you that, yeah, yes. And Douglas fir is sometimes spelled as two words, hyphenated Douglas hyphen fir. I don't know where that came from, but that's commonly used. At least it doesn't have any. Ah, like it's that seed, seed. Yeah. Right. There are many common names that mislead you, and that's a very good example because we have a lot of them. Yeah. I mean, I'm finding people call conifers pines, and some conifers are pines, but a whole lot of them are not. Pines, that's it. The other pines, or whatever, they use the word, it covers all of them, not just pines. Ah, so we have many different layers of language usage. And what I want to say is common names are fine. Use them if they suit you. Use them to recognize a plant and say hello when you walk by and to become familiar with your world. There's absolutely nothing wrong with common names. I use them. I know quite a few of them. It's just part of our language, except that it really isn't, because an awful lot of people don't even know the common names of plants, even though they are in English, and a lot of them are pronounceable. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Probably talk about the petraea.
I don't know.
The petraea, it's so yellow.
Very, wolf. No. Yeah, I don't know.
They say.
I don't know.
Maybe summarize for the Zoom.
Okay, some question about whether common names can lead you astray because they may mean different things. Different common names are used in different places, even within Oregon, within localized areas, so that if you really need to know exactly what a plant is, the scientific name is better. It's more accurate and more precise. We shall talk about that here in a minute. Anybody else want to ask a question? Teresa, anything coming in on the chat? Okay. Yes, right. Okay. Okay, and as Elliot says, there are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter, even if you don't. Scientific names. This is an official document, 1753, species plantarum, and Linnaeus gave us binomial nomenclature. This means only two names for a plant, genus and species. So he put them all into Latin. Many of these names are derived from Latin. This is a European imposition. You know, he's made the rules. He was a European speaker. He could read Latin. And so he made all the scientific names Latin and binomial, two names. Genus is a noun. A genus is always a noun, like oak, like quercus, like that. And the plural of genus is genera. It's not genuses or genii or genera. And I will probably use that. And then species, the second word is the adjective, the descriptor. And species is both singular and plural. So there's not one species and two species. No. There's one species and two species. It's exactly the same word. Yes. Yes. SPP means you're not sure which one it is. And SPP is usually plural. What do you think, Ken? SPP is plural.
I've seen it used.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Both
it's plural.
SP and SPP mean I don't know what the species is. That's what they mean, which is not,
No,
it's understandable.
I'm pretty sure SPP means a new number of species in that genus.
Yeah. So a bunch of species in that one, at least more than one. Let's just put it that way. It's the use of those is not very strict, I think, not very meaningful. And each genus and species, each scientific name has an author, and these get dropped. So if you're looking in like Mark Turner's Wildflowers of the Pacific Northwest and many other books, no author is given. But every scientific name has an author. That's the person who named it. And I put this example up here. You will find some problems with it if you're really clever. Rus radicans was the first name of poison ivy. And there's the initial L period after that, and that means Linnaeus. I started looking for a lot of Western plants, and Linnaeus was dead by the time they started discovering plants in the Pacific Northwest. So most of our plants do not say L period, but anything that's also found in Europe would say genus, species, L period, which would mean Linnaeus named it. But somebody named everything. Every single scientific name has an author and a namer, and a type specimen. So there's one specimen. We're just going to go with that right now. One specimen is called the type specimen. It means I, the author, named this plant because of this specimen. I've looked at several hundred others, and they're all like this, and this name applies to all of those, and I'm the author of all of those. But this is the specimen on which the description of the plant is based. And so there are type specimens. We're going to go with that. And for each name in today's world, there's a published description. So when you say Rus radicans, this is actually Rus robergii, which is the Oregon poison ivy, not poison oak. There's a published description in a journal. It's a set of journals. You can publish in any one of them. There's several. And that description up until 2006 had to be in Latin. So we started describing fungi around 2003 or so. And I took Latin in high school, and Jonathan Frank, who was working with me, took Latin at Yale. And so between the two of us, we could really mess it up. We could really good. But there's a Latin expert at Corvallis, Jim Treppi, and he would help us fix it up, make all the endings match and whatever you had to do, because I forgot my high school Latin. But it was helpful. In 2006, they let the riffraff in, and you can write descriptions, type descriptions in English, which is hegemony to the max, you know. It's no longer Latin, you have to speak English. And I have actually used references written in Chinese with Chinese character, whatever they say, you know, to the macrophilic. So the English language, the English word is Latinized. How would you say that? The way we would say it, exactly so. Tuber candidum will be written as tuber candidum, just like you would read it in a document, a manuscript that's completely Chinese otherwise. So that's what I mean. So scientific names used to be, actually, they're still in Latin. They're still in Latin, but they're written as English words in Latin. Does that make sense? Okay, we will continue. All right, so I'm trying some examples here. So on the left, Rhododendron occidentale, and here you have two sets of names. Tor stands for Tory, and Agre is Asa Gray. And so the first people who described that plant and wrote the description and chose this type specimen were Tory and Gray, probably Harvard. And then later, Asa Gray renamed it something else. So he doesn't have to have a new type specimen, because there is a type specimen for this plant, but now there's a new name that's applied to it, and the author who does that, and there's a description of it. So this keeps this absolute rigor about what the plants are. So that in your medicinal plants, you would have a genus and a species. There would be an author. You may or may not use that author, but there is one, and there's a type specimen somewhere. You probably don't go back to it. I've seen a few type specimens, gone back to them, but not very many. It's not an everyday activity. Okay, and then on the right, Trillium ovatum, the trillium with the tri and its 3 petals and 3 leaves seems like a helpful genus. Ovatum, slightly oval, and an author named Persh. Okay, let's do others. Okay, on the left, milkweed, Asclepias speciosa. This is the showy milkweed. And Asclepias is a god of medicine. I don't know if gods are dead or alive, so I can't really say that. Anyway, Asclepius was a Greek name for a god of medicine. So that's why it was given, that name is just plain the genus. And then that's Greek, but it's given a Latinized species, speciosa. And the one on the right, Amelanchier virgata, that's serviceberry. It's a shrub or a small tree. Again, has 2 names, 2 authors, not all in parentheses, described it first, and then someone named M. Rome, I don't know what it stands for, probably renamed it or described it and corrected it. So these are following the rules. Okay, so these were names given to plants by somebody. I mean, we talked about this being a human activity. It is. And so you wonder, how do you find a new plant? How did we find new fungi? So I think about where could you, it's really hard to find one, okay? Let's just get this over with, say that. But you might look in places where there are very few botanists, and I'll show you a map of that more again next slide, but not yet. Very remote sites that are really difficult to get to. And I'll show you a couple of those. Actually, the one that I show here is the Petraea pumicula, the pumice moonwort. It grows at about 8,000 feet on pumice fields around the Crater Lake rim. So Llao Rock and Dutton Ridge, which are high, someplace else in Newberry Crater, someplace over towards Broken Top and Sisters. So hot, very high, difficult places. Now, plant explorers have been intrepid people, really. So these are not absolutely remote sites, but not your everyday place. Unexplored habitats. So what might be an unexplored habitat? Well, underwater, underground, tree canopies. I think when the canopy studies came out, it picked up quite a few plants out of the canopy, as well as lichens and other life forms. Islands, a good place to look. The islands may be islands in the sea, or they may be islands on land, but they just stick up really high, sort of a variant on remote sites. Strange soils. What do you think? Serpentine, absolutely. A lot of strange plants on there. Have we named them? Have we gotten them all? Maybe. I don't know. And sometimes at the edge of distribution, like where the population of the plants is just sort of meeting the edge of where it can be adapted, where it can grow reasonably. That's a possible place to find. And here, this is a map of Oregon, and the size of the circles and the numbers indicate the number of species lists, not the number of species, but the number of lists, the number of times some botanists with enough courage to make a list of everything that was found there. And there's no surprise that most of them are found around Eugene and Corvallis, because that's where the botanists live. That's the point of this slide. And so if you really needed to go hunting for plants, you can see where you should go, right? Right, yeah. And Hawaii. And all those other places down there. So that's the kind of thing that I've really learned to recognize that with fungi as well, that the most fungi are found where the most mushroom hunters are. The most plants are found where the most plant hunters are. Not surprising. Okay. But if you get there, how do you tell if it's a new species? And Frank, this is the one I got off Oregon Flora of Calochortus coxii. But okay, so you've got this plant and you think, gosh, I wonder if I found something new. You're out in the Hawaii, it's up on high on some ridge. And another place that people found a lot of plants was on extreme cliff faces like the Niagara Escarpment. You know, we're talking steep cliff faces here. And so maybe you're hanging off a cliff somewhere in the Hawaii. Good chance. So you try your very best to identify this with published resources. You get out your books and you look out your microscope and you look and you can't figure it out. That's pretty common, actually, in my experience. And then you consult experts. You ask for help. You say, what do you think it is? What do you think it is? Do you think this is this kind of plant or that? And you describe it in detail with microscopes and photos. You designate a type specimen, you think, and maybe your consult thinks, maybe you have something new. So you put it in the herbarium, you designate a type specimen, and then in today's world, you need to do a short DNA sequence to say, how does this compare to something else? Is it a variant or is it really like that? I did this with a truffle in the genus Tuber. So we were digging truffles at Whetstone Savannah. It's below the table rocks, right there in the Agate Desert. And we pulled out this tuber, and I was just new to mycology. This is about year 2000, about 25 years ago. And I tried everything. I looked in all these books. I looked online. I didn't know what to do. I thought, God, I'm so dumb. I can't figure this out. I actually thought this. And so we consulted an expert. We went to Corvallis, and Jim Trappy, who's the expert on such matters, looked at it with us. And finally he said, well, I think it's a new species. And I thought, oh, so that's why I couldn't identify it. You have to reach that point where it just doesn't look like anything else. And then you have to go from there. Okay, right. All right. And the descriptions follow the rules. Here's where the rules come in. The rules are called the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. Lots of syllables there. You do not have to remember that. The latest edition was in 2018. It's done, it's edited or revised every 6 years at an International Botanical Congress. And the last one was in 2024 in Madrid. And the latest edition, it was just in July. So the latest edition of the International Code hasn't come out yet. I was going to say, if you're having trouble sleeping, you could look it up online, but I think it would probably give you a headache. It's not for the faint-hearted, but if you insist on describing a species, that's a good place to go. And you look at the closest thing that you can come to it and how they describe it, and then you describe how the one you think might be new is different from that. Anyway, that's the rules. The rules is the rules. And you submit the proposed name with a description and with photos and with DNA sequences, and you submit that manuscript to a journal. By this point, you have a specimen. You say, oh, this is going to be the type, put it in a herbarium, get a herbarium number, and the reviewers decide. And this one mushroom was brought to me by Robert Coffin, down there, in 2005, and it was underwater in the Rogue River. So that's a case of an unusual habitat, an unexplored habitat, because we know that very famous, widely read mushroom hunters were along the Rogue River. They just didn't go in, but Robert Coffin did. And they, in order to get it published, we've had over a period of a year, 8 reviews. It was, I wouldn't call it painful. I just got tougher and tougher. It's required. Anyway, I was able to name it. So the genus Southworth, it's a little straw, was what it was. We figured that out. And I gave it the species name Aquatica, which seemed appropriate because it was underwater. And that's really worked out well. And the authors there's 3 of us, Jonathan Frank, Robert Coffin, and myself. And those are the kind of initials that are officially ours for the publication. And it's kind of interesting. You know, there's so many of us describing species that I've got to cut these names off somehow. Okay, so that was ever so fun. Okay, here's the question that I see a lot. Why do scientific names change? It's kind of annoying to have to learn them. I mean, I've had to learn a lot of changes since, I think I first took taxonomic botany about 1963, and things have changed since then. So they change because of new information. And that may be something as simple as you just look at it and you say, well, that doesn't look like this. So there's something to do with floral parts. And then you can do microscopy. Maybe something has 5 petals, but what happened was the 4th petal divided. Others have 5 petals from the beginning, or something will have 4 petals and something will have 4 petals from the beginning and something will have 5 petals and 2 of them fused. I mean, that's an example. I know that went by a little fast, but there are reasons things look alike that means that they got there by different ways. So that's what an example of something you would look for new. You would study how something developed. You might look at a DNA sequence. There's a whole lot of that going on, and that's most of our name changes today. You would also try to see if something hybridized, and that's a lot of work. You know, there's just not money and support personnel and places where you can test everything for hybridization. It's a good thing to know. It's a good thing to do. But it's not very realistic. Okay, so you might find a need to change a name in a very large genus, large genera with many species, something that has 100 species. This Southworth that we looked at had 414 named species. And we fit in one, but that genus has been broken up since then into new genera. And that's an example with many species. I don't have examples for all of these. Sometimes a genus will have just one species. And that's suspicious too. That may be correct. It may have evolved in some way, but it also might be closer to some other genus. So there goes the name change. If we put a one genus species in with another genus, it loses its name. It has to go back into that other name. Sometimes a very widespread genus or species actually is more diverse than you realize. And one of the things that early on was, and is still happening in fungi, is that European names were applied to similars in America. And the more we know about them, the less likely it is that they're the same. It's not 100% at all, but there's some likelihood there. So if something is very widespread, it's possible that some parts of that have evolved to be something different. Highly localized species, something that really occurs only in one spot. You think, well, maybe it's really similar to something else. And then pretty soon somebody will put it together. Okay, speaking of put it together and come apart. So sometimes new names arise because something is split, like this genus with really two genera. Those are called, the people who do that are called splitters. And sometimes you look at different species and you say, well, that's all one. Let's just call it this one name. And those people are called lumpers. So they're splitters and lumpers. And you probably know who you are. Sometimes the species has a lot of subspecies. The Arabis, the one Linda Vorbeck studied, rock cress, she has a lot of subspecies. And I've had a lot of talk with her. It's like, shall we leave them all as subspecies? Shall we call them species? And although there are rules about how to describe things, there's no hard and fast difference between species and subspecies. There's like, well, it must have X% DNA different. Nope. It must not hybridize. Well, we haven't tested everything. So nope. They look pretty much alike, but not quite. Yeah, that happens too. So if a species has a lot of subspecies, sometimes those subspecies should be their own species. And this gets political. This is pretty interesting because the Endangered Species Act didn't say the Endangered Subspecies Act. It says the Endangered Species Act. So if you want something really preserved at the federal level, which is not that many, it needs to be a species. So you can say, well, shall I keep this Arabis a subspecies or shall I make it its own species? And if you want to protect it, you make it a species. Isn't that amazing? I mean, talk about rules and not rules. Species with short life cycles. Most herbaceous plants have annuals, say, more apt to change. Trees, not so much. It takes them too long to get from one generation to the next. And the last one I have listed here are errors in the original description, just plain mistakes. Mistakes were made. Reading content, yeah. So botanists make mistakes too, and it's like, well, the description said this, but this is what the plant looks like. So this isn't right. This has got to be, it's either a different species or something else. So sometimes names change because of mistakes. Okay, and the ending of T.S. Eliot's poem about cats, he says, I've converted this, of course. How would you address a plant? A plant's entitled to expect these evidences of respect. And so in time you reach your aim and finally call it by its name. And here's the t-shirt again. The butterwort Pinguicula vulgaris. It's called butter because it looks kind of like butter. The leaves feel sort of greasy. Pinguis apparently is Latin for fat, and ula would mean little one. So, and vulgaris means sort of common or everyday. So this is a common everyday little fatty. That's what it is. You gotta love it. So butterwort is actually very polite. It's respect. Okay, and I recommend to you that you learn more about your favorite common names. And I have to tell you, Wikipedia is fabulous. Just Google it for starters, a common name or a scientific name. And the oak stuff all started out with Wikipedia. I thought, really, okay. So basically what we've got here in science at the International Botanical Congress is a big wiki. Who makes these up? Well, we talk it over and we add to it, and somebody else adds to it, and somebody says you're full of it, and it's a wiki. So it really is. There's some rules, and there are rules for Wikipedia as well. The USDA Plants Database online, Oregon Flora website. If you happen to own Flora of Oregon, Jepson Manual was really helpful, giving me things and giving me correct spellings, authors. The Jepson Manual and the Flora of Oregon all have authors in them. So that's good. I thought Turner and Gustafson Wildflowers of the Pacific Northwest was great for common names. And I think a lot of the plant identification things are good for common names. The Rare Plants book that we're using for Adopt a Rare Plants is pretty helpful. Their authors are in there. That's pretty cool. Then Dictionary of Plant Names, and there's a recent book out called The Art of Naming, which is beyond plants to other organisms as well. Just in the politics. So that's it. I will leave these things up, and I really encourage you to look up a name and just track it down. There's so many names, and you have so many interests. If you just do a little digging, you get more into it. Yes. Yes, I have. I found burrow. You have burrow. I just returned burrow to late, and it's okay. The question is, have I heard of Borer Dictionary of Scientific Names? And it was helpful, but it's also not that helpful to me. Why not? Too many similarities and sort of a general meaning of a word and not applied specifically to something. I found it not terribly helpful. The Coombs Dictionary of Plant Names is only 3/4 of an inch thick, so it can't possibly have them all in there. But it does have a lot of the usual suspects, let's say, and it was very helpful for figuring out legends. Yes. Okay. Okay, the question comes out after 2006, what happened to the lack of Latin? The change was in the description. So the plant names are still Latinized, and the genus can be masculine, feminine, or neuter, and the adjectival ending, the species, has to match that, and it depends on whether it's describing a place or describing a person, or there's a whole bunch of rules for the species endings. Those have not changed. Plant scientific names are still in Latin, and with fairly strict Latinized endings beyond my abilities. But the description can be in English. Like the paragraph description, the color, the leaf structure. That can be an, yeah, that makes your hair curl. I mean, you can do it. It's not that impossible. It helps if you had high school Latin about 100 years ago. Sure. Other questions? Anything coming in from the chat, Teresa? Okay. Yes.
I have one comment, and that is, this came up when, with the recent Cathedral Hills wildflower brochure. So even though there are all of these, sometimes they're called authorities, like the Oregon Flora or the Jepson Manual, it's they won't all agree, even though they're all taxonomy.
Yes.
In fact, maybe it's simple to say they won't all agree. It's guaranteed they won't all agree.
Right,
So what they're actually calling, even the species name might be different. So if you're making some kind of a guide, like we were putting that together, it's good to choose your authority and say, we're following the Oregon flora.
yes,
And then
yes,
you can still track down
Right.
what is the organism that's being discussed.
right. Yes, reputable
Yeah.
books with authors' scientific names do not agree.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look in both the Jepson Manual and Oregon Flora, it usually says who done it, who wrote that, just after the genus, sometimes after the family. The living person who wrote that for the Oregon Flora or for the Jepson Manual. Jepson's been dead a long time. Oregon Flora is not a person, it's a group of people. It's a wiki, you know? We're all just talking to each other. And I don't want to make it sound vague, and I don't want to pretend that people are dumb, but there's a lot of difference of opinion. How about we say it that way? And everything is interpreted. Data doesn't speak for itself. Data has to be interpreted. And what you see and how you explain it has to be interpreted. And people do not always agree. And then we have this, how different does it have to be a different species? And there is no official answer to that. How different does it have to be two genera or two families? The rules do not address that. And you can't really depend on, I mean, you think, well, DNA has the answer to everything. Well, it doesn't. It gives you some idea of similarity, but genomes, the amount of DNA in a cell of an organism varies from organism to organism. So if you say, well, if it's 3% different, it's a new species. Well, it depends on where the 3% differences are. So that just doesn't help. Sorry. Okay, Frank is going to show you Calochortus coxii and tell you about it. He's the one who found it, and it comes out of Douglas County. Is that right? Okay, so that's a local. You can stand up. You can come up here.
Maybe we can try to use my camera on my computer to show what you've been shown before we vote. Yeah.